This week we're going to go over some modeling techniques using NURBS curves, including the revolve, loft, bi-rail, and extrude tools. Next we'll use NURBS curves to set up motion paths and use animation snapshot to create a tank tread. We'll go over various techniques for modeling pipes, cables, wires, and tubes, and add that final level of detail to our models. We'll also learn to use Maya's wire deformer. Let's get started. So we used NURBS curves all the way back in week 2, but I wanted to take some time to kind of showcase some of the other things you can do with NURBS curves. So if I come to my Create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool, and let's go to a side view. And I'm going to point snap here, and then we'll just kind of draw out a shape here. We're going to do what's called a revolve. And this is something that I learned in my Intro to Maya class, and to be honest, I don't really use it all that often, but I figured that since I'm doing a lesson on modeling with curves, that I would show you guys how to do this. So let's say we're going to make this kind of goblet type thing. I'm basically tracing out the profile of what I want this thing to be, and then we'll go ahead and point snap it at the end and hit enter to create our curve. So then what we can do is come over here to surfaces. We'll go to the revolve option box, and let me just reset the settings here. I'm going to leave a lot of stuff at default here. There are a few things that I do want to change. I definitely want the output geometry to be polygons. I want to set the type to quads, and I want the tessellation method to be control points. So you notice here that we have 8 segments. If I hit apply now, you can see that we've created essentially this shape with 8 sides. Let me just go ahead and undo, and let's make this 12. So just hit apply again. And I'll grab this and we'll go up to mesh display and reverse. Basically we're looking at reverse normals here. Now this wouldn't be a very difficult shape to just model with a cylinder. It would take a bit of work. I will say that the revolve method is a much faster way to get shapes similar to this. So it's one of those tricks that I use once in a while. There's a couple cool things about this. If I go to smooth preview mode and then we select our curve, you can see that since we used the control points method, that the smooth preview pretty much follows our curve exactly. What's also cool about using this method is since there's construction history, I can go in after the fact and kind of affect this shape. So that's pretty much the revolve tool. There's not much else to it. And the next thing we're going to do is use NURBS curves to create a loft. So I'll just go ahead and grab my CV curve tool again, and then I'll just draw out a shape down here on the ground plane. And then let's duplicate this curve, and then in the top view let's just change it so it's a different profile entirely. Maybe this goes off to this side, and maybe this goes off to this side as well. Let's actually add some more variation in here. I'm going to turn on soft select, and we'll kind of just add like a bit more undulation to this curve. So now if I grab both curves and let's go to the surfaces, loft options, let's reset these, do polygons, quads, control points, and let's just hit loft. And now if I smooth preview this, you can see what we're getting here. This is a trick I use anytime I have to make curtains, but what's cool about it is to the revolve is I can go back and edit these curves at any time. So that's using curves to create a loft. I'm going to go to the side view now, and let's create like a profile of a car, for example. So there's kind of like a swoopy shape of a car. Let me grab some control vertices here and here, and we'll just move these out. So you've got kind of a curvy shape here. If I take this over this way, throw it in a group, duplicate it, and negative scale it. So now we've got two curves, right? Let me just unparent both of these and blow away the groups. So now we have these two curves here, and in addition to loft, there's also a NURBS surface tool called Birail, and it's very similar to a loft, but you basically control what the profile of this curve would look like. So if we grab these two and just did a straight loft, you can see what we would get here. And let me reverse the normals. So we just get this simple shape. It looks just like a plane, right? Let me delete that real quick. And if I grab, let me create an EP curve. And an EP curve is basically, it stands for endpoint, and you basically just create the start point and the end point. And now you can see that there's two control vertices inside. So if I say I grab this and I just pull this curve down like this. So we're going to go up to surfaces, and let's do the Birail 1 tool. And we're just going to want to set the the output to polygons, quads, and control points, like the rest of our surface tools, basically. So now let me activate the tool, and you'll see the instructions down here in the bottom left-hand corner. It says select the profile curve, which is this one, and now select the two rail curves. So I'm going to select this and this. And if I go ahead and reverse this surface, you'll see a little better. You can see that we've created this loft, but it essentially has the profile of this curve that we created in the front. So now let me go, I'll do my CV curve tool this time, and we'll go to the front view, and then we'll just curve snap here. But say I wanted to give more of a cockpit type thing to this. And I'm doing my best to kind of eyeball how this goes. And then I'll just curve snap to the end, just so I have something symmetrical here. Now if I do a Birail 2 in surfaces here, let's go to our Birail 2 tool options, polygons, quads, control points, that's fine. So now what I have to do is select the two profile curves, which are these two, and now select the two rail curves. And you can see what this has done is it's basically created, let me smooth this out, it's basically created a blend from start to finish between this profile curve and this profile curve. Now, the third tool in this Birail menu is the Birail 3 Plus tool. 3 or more profile curves, essentially. So you could basically do an entire cross section of a car with this method, and it would interpolate the surface along these various curves. So what I'll do here is let me duplicate this. We'll do this point, we'll do this point here, and we'll do this point here. And so for this front one, let's actually flatten this out a bit. It's just going to be very subtle. And let's move these all down, and I'll just go ahead and curve snap these to that widest point of the curve there, and that'll be kind of our hood shape. Let's do the same thing here, except we'll drag this down this way, curve snap these kind of to our lowest point of this curve roughly. We could always mirror this again, But I definitely want this cockpit to be wider at this point, and maybe taller as well. So we'll go ahead and do that like that. And then actually let me just, I'll just delete this curve, because I think the interpolation of those curves will be fine. So now we've got 4 profile curves here. Let's go ahead and do our surfaces by rail 3+ tool. Set this to polygons, quads, control points, that's fine. Let's by rail 3. So now it says select any number of profile curves. And then it says to press enter to select the rail curves. So I'm going to press enter, and then I'll select these 2. And now let me reverse the normals, and I'll just hit 3. And now you can see we're getting a pretty complicated shape using a handful of curves, but it's actually pretty precise. Now you can see that the edge loops kind of bunch up around these control curves, and that's not ideal, but we can always go in and adjust edges later. If I take this, let's take this curve for example now, and we can, I'll turn on symmetry. I found that the easiest place to find symmetry is in this modeling toolkit. The rest are all hidden in the tools, so I'm just going to grab this. See, we make this a little more bulbous. For this one, we can flatten these out even more. Maybe drop them down. Or maybe even drag them out this way. So to be completely honest, these are tools that I rarely ever use, but they're kind of good ones to have in your back pocket, just in case you need to make something that's a little more complicated. And I believe that if we move these curves forward, yeah, these curves even work in multiple dimensions here, so you can really start to get some cool, crazy shapes. And with this by rail 3+ tool, you can go as crazy as you want and define every inch of this surface, but yeah, oftentimes these sort of things are something I'll just poly model, but this could provide a good base to use quad draw on top of, or something like that. Anyway, I just wanted you guys to be aware of these tools. There's a chance you might never use them, but I think they're good to know. So one of the last things you can do with curves is create motion paths. So let me go ahead and create a CV curve. And we'll just go this way like this. And now if I create a cube, and let's just scale it up a bit, and I'm going to just move this. We'll just scale this down. And turn my symmetry off. And let me just grab this, scale this down, and then let's put an edge here. And just to create kind of an arrow really quickly. I'll scale it down actually. So now I've got this path and I've got an arrow. So what I can do is switch over to animation up here and then go to constrain, and let's open this attach to motion path. So I'll just reset the settings here. And we'll click the object, the curve, and just hit apply. And you can see that obviously my arrow is pointing in the wrong direction. I want it to be facing down the curve. So what I'm going to do is undo, and I'll check inversed front over here. So now if I hit apply, the arrow is facing the correct way. Let me just harden these edges. Back to animation. So obviously this shape has now moved to the front of this curve. If we scrub through the timeline, you can see that it now follows along the curve. And this is something that's used a lot in animation. Let me grab some of these control vertices, and I'll just do soft select here. And I'll just move some of these points around, just so we have a little more of a different path here. So what's cool is you can continually edit the path that this thing takes. I'll hide my grid for a moment. Motion paths are used all the time in animation to fly cameras or objects through scenes, and it really allows you to control the path of things. I'm going to go ahead and create a camera, and we'll scale it up. And you can see that the front of the camera is facing down -Z. So we're going to want to put the front axis at Z, and we'll leave inverse on because we want it to face down -Z. So now if I grab the camera path and we hit attach, you can see that the camera now flies along. Now I could look through this camera, but there's nothing really there yet. So what I'm going to do is I'll just kind of create a plane here, and let's do 20, and we'll just grab a bunch of faces and create kind of like a city path that this thing is flying through, right? So let me do this, and we'll just extrude these up. And now if I go ahead and look through the camera, and we go ahead and play the animation, ooh, you can see it's really extremely fast, but if I scrub slow, you can kind of visualize what this thing is doing. Motion paths can also be used to model things, and if I go ahead and delete this camera and plane, let me create a sphere just for the sake of demonstration here, and I'll set my timeline to 100, and let me then grab this, and we'll just go ahead and constrain attach to motion path. So now we've got this sphere going on along our motion path, and what we can actually do is if we go up here to visualize, we can do create animation snapshot. And let me go to the options there. So it's giving us an end time of, let me just reset these settings. It gives us an end time of 10. I'm going to change this to 100. So that's basically going to create 100 spheres, one for every frame on our timeline. And let me just hit apply. And now you can see that we've essentially got this kind of pearl necklace thing. So there's a couple things I want to point out here. You'll notice that the spacing of the spheres up at the beginning and the end is a lot closer together than towards the middle here. And that has to do with the animation curve. So if I go to the graph editor again, and we select our P-sphere, which is on the motion path, you can see that our motion path has this kind of S-curve. And what they call that in animation is actually a slow in, slow out. In our case, we call them flat tangents, because you can see that if I grab the keyframe, that the tangents are flat. So if I grab both of these keyframes and hit this one, which is linear tangents, now you can see that we have a straight line between our two keyframes, and now all of our spheres are evenly spaced. The other cool thing too is I can at any point grab this curve and move it, and it'll affect the snapshot in real time. So this is a really powerful tool for modeling. As you can see, this is kind of like a pearl necklace that I've created, but this is something that I would use to make like a chain or a robotic tentacle or a tank tread, which is the exercise we'll be doing this week in just a moment. So we're going to want to create a tank tread, and you can see that I have a single tread that I've modeled here. It's nothing too crazy. I haven't even, you can see I haven't even cleaned up some of the beveled edges, but this is just for demonstration purposes. For the exercise this week, I'm going to have you create your own tread. It doesn't have to be similar to this. The only criteria I'm looking for is that there's a distinct front and back and a distinct bottom and top, because that's going to be important for knowing that we've set up our tank tread right. So we have the single tread, and we're going to be using motion path and animation snapshot, which I just showed in the last lesson. But for the tank tread, since it's a closed loop, I'm going to actually start with a NURBS circle. So let me go ahead and create that. Now, right out the gate, there are going to be a couple of caveats with this. For example, if we hit F8 and look at our control vertices, you'll see that there's only 8 of them right now. And that's going to be a little problematic for what we're doing. We're going to definitely need more than 8 control vertices to make the shape of our tank tread. So I'm going to grab this NURBS circle again, and then over here under inputs, you see make NURBS circle 1. I'm going to change the sections to 24. And now you can see if we look at the control vertices that we have a lot more to play with. So first things first, I'm going to actually rotate this, and you see I have a snap on my rotate right now. That's just in tool settings, step snap relative. I have it set to 45-degree angle. Doesn't really matter. It's just as long as this is a vertical 90-degree angle. So one of the things I noticed in preparing this lesson is that if we look at our control vertices, every one of them is a dot except for this one up here. And this kind of indicates the start and finish of the curve itself. Now the circle is a closed loop, so it doesn't really matter. Our tread will go all the way around. But I found that I've had the best results when I rotate this by 90 and Z as well. Just so that this beginning is actually on the side of the tank tread. I'm not sure why, but it's just been acting finicky with me. So I'm going to take these 5 control vertices here and up here, and I'll just sort of snap them. And then I'll take these side ones here, and I'll scale them down, and then I'll scale them out as well. And we can kind of finesse this curve a little bit more as well. But I definitely want to get more of a rounded shape for the sides here. You don't want it to be too pointy. So you want like a nice kind of dull rounded curve. Let me grab all these and scale them out. Alright, so now we've got kind of a basic tank tread shape. Obviously once we do the motion path and stuff, we can still edit this shape, so I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But let's go ahead and grab these two, and we'll go to our constrain motion path, attach to motion path options. So time slider is good. You'll notice that Maya defaults the time slider to 120. I'm going to actually set that to 100 just so we don't have as many to deal with. So now I have my tank tread and my path, and I'm just going to hit apply. So you notice right off the bat we're not getting exactly the result that we want. If I skip forward a frame, it looks a little closer. And you can imagine the tank tread going around this way, but once it gets past the side of the curve here, you'll notice it flips upside down. And the reason for this is that we have the world up type set to vector. So if I go ahead and undo, And this is kind of a specific thing for a tank tread, because the part has to actually flip around a complete 180 degrees. I'm going to set this to world up type object up, and then I'll use the name of this curve as my world up object. And now if I grab these two and hit apply, you can see that right off the bat we're getting better behavior out of this thing. Now there's some problems down here, so we're gonna have to figure that out. I've noticed that a lot of times with this, it acts goofy if these points here are lower than these other points. So let me move those up a bit, and maybe it wants these ones to also be up a bit. So I'm not sure why it's so finicky about those control verts, but essentially if you notice some weird behavior, it's either the control vert is too high or too low, so just kind of move it around until the problem corrects itself. I'll usually just scrub this until I notice an error and then move that control vert around. But anyway, now that we have this thing behaving around this motion path like a tank tread should be, we're going to do our animation snapshot. So let me just exit this really quick, and let's do visualize, and let's do animation snapshot, and we'll just have the start and end be 100, and we'll just grab our tank tread and hit apply. Okay, so now we've got our tank tread here, but you'll notice a couple things. First of all, the tank treads are all way too close together, and they bunch up at the beginning and end here of the curve. So what I have to do is actually adjust the animation curve for this motion path. So let me open the graph editor again, and you'll see that we have once again our slow in, slow out, or flat tangents. So let me just change those to linear, and you'll notice that our animation snapshot has updated, and now the tank treads are evenly spaced, but they're too close together. So I could grab this keyframe and kind of up here in the stats move it around, or even use the move tool in here. But the move tool in here is a little touchy with the mouse, so what I'm going to do is grab this tread, and I'll just click on motion path over here. And now if I shift click and drag, you'll notice that the key frame over here turns red. And you can actually do this at any point on the timeline, and if you have keys there, you can drag them around, and that's just shift click and drag. But I'm going to shift click and drag on frame 100 here, and if I just drag this keyframe back, you'll notice that the tank treads are starting to space out, and I'm just going to space them out until this this kind of hinge area looks more natural. So maybe something like this. And there you'll notice that they're starting to come apart towards here, and I think what I'm going to do in that case is actually move these control verts. I think it's because I don't have them as being enough of a curve, so I'll just go ahead and scale those out a little more. And as I mentioned, we can actually change these curves up. So say you had a tank that was had treads that were shaped more like this, you could move these up. You'll notice I'm getting this warning down there every time. That's perfectly normal. It's just warning me about moving these around. So you'll notice now that I'm getting everything's kind of spreading out again. Let me try and fix that over here. And it might be easy if I put this on a layer so I can hide it to see the shape of the curve. I'll move this over. You're definitely going to want the curve points to be maybe a little more evenly spaced on these round areas. What you could even do is create the wheels of your tread, and when you're building your curve you could point snap them around there. So let me turn on my snapshot again. It's looking a little better, but we're still getting some separation. This is something that can always be edited. Maybe we'll want to actually move the keyframes themselves. So if I shift drag that again, maybe I just move these so they're a little closer on the curves. And that's an improvement already. Maybe the treads are meant to kind of collapse into each other on the straight parts. So that was the basics of creating a tank tread. There's potential for rigging this tank tread using this curve setup, but it's a little bit more involved of a process than I'm ready to get into for this class. I would definitely recommend taking a mechanical rigging course if you want to learn to do this, or at the very least do a little research online, because there are tutorials out there on how to set that up. But since using motion paths and animation snapshot is kind of a valuable tool as a hard surface modeler, this is an exercise I definitely want you guys to try out this week. So easily my favorite tool to use with curves is our good old friend the Extrude tool. Now if I go ahead and create a CV curve, and let's just make like kind of a snaking shape like that, I can then create a cube, and then let's just curve snap it over here and make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to change the pivot point to this face up here, and now let's actually curve snap again, and I'll just rotate this a bit so it's kind of even with the curve. And now what I can do is grab this face and the curve and hit extrude. And you can see that it's kind of just made one long extrusion that goes to the end of the curve. But if I add divisions, you can see it start to take the form of the curve. And let me go up to 50. So now you can see we've got this long noodle extruded out of a cube. And what's cool is I can move these control vertices around and the polys kind of come along for the ride. And that's going to really come in handy when we want to make pipes and wires. Alright, so here I am in my space vet scene. I'm ready to add some cables and wires and tubes and pipes. But before I begin, there's one thing in this scene that's going to make working with curves difficult, and that is that in the show menu we have NURBS curves turned off. So I'm going to want to turn that back on. And we'll see our guide curves, but we're going to just have to ignore them. And I think I'm going to start by adding a cable that runs along this shaft and terminates somewhere over here. I picture it almost like a bike cable that works the mechanism on these front wings here. So go to the side view and let me create a CV curve, and I'll just start here. Let me turn on so I can actually see what I'm doing here. Maybe it terminates up here like this. So I'm going to center the pivot on this curve. Let's go ahead and move it over to where it needs to be. I want to kind of start out of that area there. Alright, so now that I have this curve drawn out, I'm going to go ahead and grab a cylinder, and I'll just curve snap it over here for now. And we'll make this 0.5, which is going to make it 1 centimeter in diameter. And I'll make it 6-sided since we don't need a whole lot of resolution here. And only other thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change the pivot to this these top faces on here. So now what I can do is curve snap and get it to the end of that curve. And now let's rotate it. Let's do -90. Let me go to face mode, grab these faces, grab the curve, and then I'll just hit extrude. So now let me add some divisions. If I go over here to this extrude face, I can grab my divisions and sort of drag them out. So I'll keep the divisions at 25 for now, but it is something that we can go in and change. So let me start moving these points around so this wire kind of looks like it belongs. Maybe we could go along the bottom of this thing. And we'll probably end up creating some kind of a clip. Let me grab actually all the control vertices over here. And then we'll just go along kind of the center of the stick there. Well, so now let me grab these points here, move them over this way, and now I can kind of start to finesse exactly what this curve is doing. And you know what? Maybe they terminate right there. Let me actually, I'll give this a little sag down here. And let's actually move this point of intersection to there. So it looks like it's actually coming out of the housing of this thing. So now that I have what I want here, I'm going to actually make some changes. First of all, I'll add an edge loop in here. And now I can go ahead and delete some of these faces. And we can grab this and just go ahead and extrude this out. And I'll drop in an edge loop here as well. And then we can actually delete this edge loop. And let me drop in an edge loop here as well. Adding these kind of connectors into your hoses is kind of a good way to make them look like they're actually inserting into something rather than just being a straight up hose. So let's do the same thing over here. So back here you can see that we're not quite meeting up with that area. So I'm going to grab these faces here and we'll just scale them up a bit and then extrude them back as well. And just delete. So let me drop in some edge loops here. And actually let me grab these faces here and I'll grow selection and I'll just kind of move this out a bit. So now when I smooth, I have this wire that looks like it inserts in a logical place. So now that I no longer need the curve, if I go ahead and delete history, you can see that now when I grab this curve and move it around, nothing happens. So we basically deleted that connection between this wire and the curve. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the curve, and now we can I'll assign, I've made a rubber material, so I'll just call this, I'll just assign this rubber mat to this. And that's kind of how my hose is going to go. Now the other thing about this hose is it's got quite a bit of edge loops in it. So I think I'll go ahead and start collapsing some of these edge rings. Just because we don't need all that much resolution on this curve. Especially areas like here where it's very straight, we can just delete some edge loops. So let me, I'll just edge ring and collapse this. Do this one as well. And now that's kind of lightened up the topology a little bit. The other thing that's kind of important to selling these sort of curves and whatnot is actually creating some clips. Let me move this up a bit. And then I'm going to move this also. Wires are almost never left hanging like this. So what I'm going to do is I'll create another cylinder and snap it to the front here. And then we'll go ahead and rotate this 90 degrees. And let's go out this way. And let's just scale this thing up. And scale it in quite a bit. Let's do... This could almost be considered like a tie wrap or something. I'll make this 8-sided. Actually, let's do 12-sided. So then what I'll do down here is actually I'll rotate this. I'll rotate this so the bottom edge is kind of flat, and that's about 15 degrees. And then we will just extrude this piece out. And again. And then scale that in. Let me first freeze the transforms since we made it off axis, and then I can take this and just sort of scale it in. And let me scale this in so it hugs it a little tighter. And then what we can do is sort of take the verts of this and just sort of match it in the center there. So now let me take this piece and let's actually make it a little better. Just grab all these edges around here. So I'll go to the edge ring and then do to edge perimeter, and then I'll just go ahead and grab these other edges here, and then we'll just use the bevel tool and turn chamfer off, offset as fraction off, and let's do let's leave it at 0.2. So now I can go ahead and let's just delete these two edges and drop in our own edge loop. And now what I can do is let's connect these. And let's assign this our rubber mat as well. It just gives it a bit more realism to have this kind of clip piece that's attached, and almost like a tie wrap. Let me go ahead and duplicate this back, maybe to there, and we'll just grab the vertices on this piece and just sort of move them into place. And now we've got this cable that adds function to the mechanism up here. So let me grab this, and we will, let's call this L front wing cable SDM, and let's then call this L wing cable tie 1 DM, and then I'll just copy and paste. And this whole naming thing is kind of just it's a good habit to have, because we're going to go through at the end and clean up all the names, but it helps to kind of name things as you go. So let me find our let me find our left front wing in the hierarchy. Basically select this piece and hit F, and then it'll show up in the hierarchy. So let me grab these 3 parts we just created, and let's just parent them in. And now we've got our piece in the hierarchy. So that's pretty cool. Let's now make some wires for these headlights now. So if I go to 4 mode, I'm gonna just have it coming out from the bottom, just because that's probably what we'll see the most. And then I'll just create a CV curve tool. And then let's just kind of take them up that way. So now let me center the pivot on that. And now move it out even with this kind of center of the headlight piece. And actually, we can't really see where it intersects. So let me move some of these control verts around and tighten this up a bit. Let me just make a little more sense out of this. It'd be nice if that came straight out that way. And actually, maybe I'll just delete this control vertice. So now let me create another cylinder, and we'll do the same thickness and make it 6-sided again. And then I'll just isolate this with the curve, and then I'll just curve snap. So now with this one, I'll change the pivot once again and curve snap. And now we can grab the faces here, grab the curve, and extrude. So let's just crank up the divisions a little more thoughtfully here. Now this kind of gives us the right curvature, but I think there are a bit too many edge loops, so we'll have to remove some of those later. So now let me, I'll drop in an edge loop here and make our kind of connection point. And let's actually move some of the control verts up, so just so this is a little bit nicer. And actually, since this piece is at such an angle, it might be nice if this cable came out at more of an angle. So let me just try and work to center it on this plate back here. Move this one out a bit. Now that I have kind of a curvature to this wire that I'm happy with, let's go ahead and delete the history. And then I'll go ahead and extrude this out a bit. Let's add some edge loops as well. And since this piece, we can actually drag this up, and we'll move this all the way down here like this, and just delete those extra faces. And I kind of want to center this whole thing on the this sort of housing piece a little better. So I'm going to use soft select and just kind of move it into place a little better. So now I've got that wire there. Let me add this detail here. Turn soft select off. Now let's just extrude out once again. And then back here, we could just delete those faces. Drop in a couple edge loops. And now let's kind of clean up some of these edge loops in here. So I'll just go edge ring and collapse. There, 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 there. And then I'll just go ahead and delete this edge. And that kind of gives us, I'll assign my rubber mat. Kind of gives us a nice hose for the light bulbs there. Let me duplicate this and we'll just put it in line with this headlight here. And then move it this way. And just kind of line it up a little better. But for this one, it kind of intersects in a weird place, so I'm going to just grab these verts with soft select on. And then I'll just move them over to about there. And that's kind of a good thing to do in general, just so these aren't identical and they don't look too similar. That tends to look weird. Well, so that's kind of adding life to that area. I think I want to do a muffler type pipe here that goes from this area here and around the bottom here next to the door, and then maybe across the top end. Maybe it could hook up to these pipes in here. So let me get my CV curve tool, and I'm gonna overshoot that area a bit, just so we have some control vertices to play with. And I'm just going to be pretty regular with my control vertices. So every few grid lines I'll do something. And then obviously you need to be a little tighter around a curve. So I'm just going to do this, and then I'll go all the way to this last hole over here. And then I'll do a few just to overshoot it. And now if I take this curve and move it to where I kind of want this muffler piece to be, we can kind of position the curve a little better. So let's grab this endpoint here and just sort of shove it in there. You can see I've got some kind of curve snap action happening there. Let me move this one out here. And I'll move it this way as well, just so we get kind of this curve to it. Let me turn off my space vet for a moment and we can play with this idea. Let me turn this on. So you see I'm starting to kind of lose, and maybe let's make a group with these, let's make a layer of these guys. Actually, I'll just hide my motion bases, and now we can kind of see a little better what we're doing here. I'm going to grab the control vertices up here, and we'll sort of position them so we get that curve going to the right spot, but I think I want these ones to be a little further back. And obviously this part isn't going to really attach to anything, but I just want to get I want some kind of a tube down there that's reminiscent of a muffler. So I'm actually going to move these all forward just so it hugs the inside of that fender a bit more. But I'll move I'll grab all these, just kind of move them in to maybe like there. That's kind of cool, so it kind of hugs that piece a little more. And then let's get these two and just kind of rotate them so they're a little straighter. And then I can move this way to make that curvature happen. And now I can just move all these control words back and maybe even delete this one. So let me move these back so we get more of a curve. And let's take all these and just sort of scale them in so they're flat. And that's kind of gonna be helpful. And actually what could be cool is if these kind of fit into this area up here. So I'm just going to move those out like that. The only problem is now I'm getting this kind of weird angle here, but that's okay. I'll just move these down like this. And that's going to be kind of cool when we actually adjust the curve later. Let me align these better with the curve of the fender. Move this one out a bit. So I'll go ahead and hide my space vent. I've got this interesting shape happening here. Let me grab a cylinder. I'll curve snap it and rotate it by 90 in this axis. Let's make this like 5 centimeters. And actually, since this is well, we'll play with this maybe. So let me give this 8 sides, and I will change the pivot point to this point here. And let's just again curve snap it this way. And now we can grab our face and grab the curve and extrude. So let me adjust the divisions here. You can see that 25 maybe isn't quite enough, so let's try 50. And 50 actually looks somewhat good. We're getting a little weirdness there though, so let's try 70. Maybe even 80. You can see it doesn't quite always put the divisions where you want them to be, but we can always go in and delete edges later. So let's just go straight to 100, and just because I want this curve to be kind of well represented. So let's see how this looks in context. I think I want it to be a little more thick. So what I can do here is actually grab all these verts, and if we go to the move tool and go to the tool settings, I can change the axis orientation from world to normal. And now you can see that our manipulator has changed U, V, and N. And if I drag on the N, you can see that my extruded pipe is kind of expanding. Let me hit 3 so I see the actual thickness of it. And I think that's actually looking a little better in terms of thickness. So that's actually really cool. But once you're done with this tool, you have to be sure to change this back to either world or object. Let's actually move all these faces up a bit. Let's grab all these faces here. We'll just soft select maybe like there, and just sort of move it up so it sits in this sort of space of that clip a little better. So now what I'm going to do is go in and optimize these edges a bit. So I'll grab any of these edges that are completely straight. So I'll grab this one, and then I'll double click over to this one. And then if I control right click and go to edge loop and delete, see I've deleted all those edge loops there. So that's kind of a quick way to get rid of edge loops that are in like a straight. And we grab this one and then all the way to this one and do the same thing. Because anywhere you have like a straight pipe, you really don't need edge loops. So now I'll isolate this, and let's just clean this up a bit more. Let me delete every other edge and see what that gets us. So that's a little more reasonable, I think. Just move these, space these out a little more. This one, I think we could probably collapse a bunch of these. We don't want to delete so many that we lose our curvature, but we definitely don't need so many to maintain the curvature either. Go ahead and do that there. So that I'm pretty happy with. Let me assign my greeble mat, and maybe I'll assign greeble mat 2 to this, so it's silver. Let me I'll soften these edges so now we've got this piece here. What I'm going to do next is actually I'll duplicate this, and then I'll grab these faces on here, and then I'll just shift select the rest and delete. And now I'll go and center my pivot here, and let me just grab this edge, and then we'll use the soft select just so like there, and I'll scale this edge in so it's completely inside. And now what I can do is duplicate this, move this along here, and then we'll just duplicate this like this. And obviously we'll have to adjust this last one here. You'll just turn on soft select again, move it like there, and then just move this pipe into place. And then let me duplicate it one last time, my side view. And that kind of gives us a cool muffler-like look there. Let me isolate all these pieces though. So this one needs a little more work. Let me scale this in a little more. And then for this one let's actually rotate it a bit. Actually, this one, let's actually rotate this face down like this. Just kind of move it, scale it. And you know what, I'll just sort of hand move these into place. Now if I grab this and smooth, see we've got this sort of pipe assembly here. And since this is going to be behind our engines, I think we can get away with leaving those as intersecting pipes. So what I'm going to do is grab all these, and I'm going to actually combine them. And I'll delete history. And let's just delete these extra groups that get made. And let's call this L muffler pipe STM. And let's just put it in our let's just go ahead and delete my left side, my duplicate left side. Let's just put this in L body null. And now if I unhide my motion bases, you can see that we've got that nice kind of pipe detail back there. Just adds a bit to it. Actually, I think I'm gonna make an area of this a little thicker. So let me use my cut polygon tool. And now I can grab these faces and I'll just extrude them out a little bit. Just to give it a little more of an interesting look. Let's grab these edges and run our bevel tool. And turn chamfer off, offset diffraction off. And I think 0.2 is fine. So let me just cool, so that kind of gives us a little more bang for our buck there. I'm gonna drop in a couple edge loops in this area here. Just a little extra support for these pipe pieces. Cool, so that looks pretty neat. Maybe I could add some sort of a pattern on that if I texture it later. So another way to use NURBS curves to model is to use them to deform existing geometry. So you can see I've built this kind of simple wire loom here. It's basically all the same kind of cylinder, but just different scales. And I've built this kind of simple clip to kind of just hold them into place, and even reused my screws from the headlights. But I wanted to show you a quick way to get visual interest to some of your wire stuff. So I'm going to grab these three and go up here to deform and go to nonlinear, and let's do a twist deform. And so now if I open this up and I just kind of drag the end angle, you can see that we're already getting a little more visual interest along this wire loom. So let me do the same with these three. Again, it's under the deform menu, nonlinear, twist. And now if I go over here and go to end angle and drag the opposite direction, we have some twisted wires for our wire loom. So let me delete history to get rid of our deformers. I'm going to create a CV curve, and I'm just going to grid snap along every 2 grid units and hit enter. And that's kind of the length of our wire loom here. So I'll call this loom 1 curve, and I'll just go ahead and drop it into this group. Now I want to apply what's called a wire deformer to this. So wire deformer is under the deform menu, and it's a little different than their typical deformers because you kind of activate the tool before it's selecting anything. So I'm going to select wire here, and now in the bottom left corner you'll see it says select shapes to deform and press enter. So I'm just going to swipe everything here except for the curve, press enter, and now it says select wire curves and press enter to finalize the operation. So I'll grab this curve and hit enter. So now if I go to control vertices here and start, let me turn soft select off, and start moving stuff around, you'll see that some of the geometry comes with this, but it's definitely not the effect that we want. So let me just undo that. And the reason for that is that this drop-off distance is set to 1 centimeter. So it's basically only affecting geometry that's 1 centimeter around there. So let me set this to something like 20. And now you can see that when I start moving this around, that it works a little more like I would expect it to. But you notice how this is kind of getting this curve to it? That's because it's starting to drop off a little too early. So let me undo that, and let's set this to 100. And now if I grab something like this, you can see that everything stays pretty rigid. But you can see, just by dragging these points around, that we can get some pretty complicated and interesting shapes just with these control points here. But let me go back and undo. And as with everything, I'm going to save this Loom 1 as an original. And I'm going to actually duplicate special. Whoa! I did not expect that. So Maya won't let me duplicate special this loom without crashing, so I guess what we're going to have to do is, if we want to use this loom more than once, we'll have to create the wire deformer each time. So just to have this loom at the origin and flattened out, I'm going to actually work first on the duplicate, and then I'll just hide the original for now. So let me go back to my wire deformer tool, grab everything here except for that curve, and press enter, and then I'll grab the curve and press enter, and now set my drop off distance to 100, and now I've got my wire deformer set up again. So let me grab this group, and I will go ahead and unhide my space vet. And I want this to basically kind of come off of this plate piece here and travel down the side of the body here, and maybe tuck behind this area there. So I'll grab my first one, and we'll just rotate it. We'll just rotate it around this way, so 180. And then we'll go to the bottom view, and let's just put it something like here. Let me hide my engines. Cool, so now let me get loom 2 up into place up here. So if I grab the curve now and do control vertex, and we just kind of move this off to this side here. I'm going to move these control verts up a little bit so we have that intersection happening there. And you'll notice how this, as this curves around, this piece is kind of getting this weird sheared shape on it. So let me grab this and isolate it, and then I'll just select that piece. And what's cool about the wire deformer having kind of a live history to it is I can just drag this down until it straightens out again, and then we have our we have that clip there. So let me grab the curve once again, and let's see how we're doing here. Grab this piece, and just sort of align it to the body, this sort of inside of the body part. And I'll just rotate that around like that. Cool. And that's looking pretty cool. Maybe I can even move this down a bit. I think what I might do here is let me select this group again, and then I will actually grab all these parts, and maybe actually make sure I don't have the curve selected. And then I think what I could do here is just soft select this. If I move these down in this direction, you can see that they travel down the curve a little bit. But I'll probably just reuse this bracket here to just kind of integrate those into there. So since I actually have these pieces in here, I can duplicate them, and you can see I can move these ones around because they are not affected by the wire deformer. Let me just group these real fast. Center the pivot, and I will just rotate them this way 90 degrees. And now they can kind of, now this can kind of just go where it's because I moved this curve point. But now let me grab this control vertex back here and just move these down. And now you can see my pieces kind of line up there. So that's kind of cool. Now what I can do is if I delete history here, and now you can see that this no longer does anything. So then I can actually delete this curve. So that's our first one. Let me go back and I'll duplicate this and unhide it. And now let's set up the next wire deformer. So deform wire, grab everything except the curve, press enter, grab the curve, press enter. And last step is set the drop-off distance to 100. So now I'm ready to pose this other one. Let me rotate it around this way, 180. And I'll shut off my finals group. And we'll just kind of align this. It's going to be about there. So let's just sort of align this to this curved shape and move it out towards this direction. And now I'll open this group up so I can get at the curve easier. Grab the control vertices up here. Maybe I'll turn this off. And we'll just sort of angle these together. But I'm going to actually just move the whole group up so these meet up, because I don't want it to distort too much. So grab this curve, control vertex. Let's move this out a little bit in this direction. Just kind of line these wires all up. They don't have to be perfect since they're intersecting with the this fender piece here. And I think I have soft select on, which I shouldn't. But and then I'll just continue to sort of follow the curve of this fender. And let's grab all these control verts. And actually, this is the point, I think, where we're going to it's the point where we're gonna sort of veer off. Oh, so let me grab these and just sort of move them in place. Now for this one, we'll kind of hide that intersection of these two back here behind this the muffler pipe, which I might actually move out, but I really want it to be down here, so let me move it like this. And we can always, after we delete this deformer, we can go in and just sort of twist that into the right shape. Let me go ahead and delete history, and then I'll just delete this base wire. And now I'll delete the curve as well. So now with this, and let me grab this, I can sort of fix this a little more. So I'll grab all these pieces, and we'll just grab these verts here and turn on soft select. And now we can, I'm going to actually angle these a little more like this, and we'll angle them sort of to match that surface like that as well. And maybe even move them up a bit. Rotate them. And then what I'm actually going to do for these, all these pieces here, is just turn off soft select, and I'll just grab these endpoints and just kind of scoot them in till they intersect back here. Just tuck them behind that piece. Cool, so now we've got our kind of wire loom setup going along the inside of that fender. Looks like these ones are kind of floating. So I'm going to actually move these up so they're intersecting a little better. That's pretty much that. I think I'm going to add the same kind of effect to the front fender here, but I won't make you guys sit through that. I know that last one's probably pretty painful. So there's one other method I like to use to make little pipes and tubes and stuff, and it actually doesn't involve curves at all. I'm actually going to create a cube, and let's go up to this engine, for example. And just snap this to here. If I look at some reference of an actual jet engine, you can see that there are little pipes on here for days. And I'm not going to go this crazy with my engines, but I definitely want to add some of that detail here. So I'm just going to use this cube and sort of scale it up. And I'll do 2.25, and it's going to be important to use kind of a nice round number for this, because we're going to be extruding and sort of using that number to kind of define the thickness of the pipe. So I'll just extrude out, and then let's hit G again, and let's put our 2.25 in here. So now we've got essentially a perfect cube on the end of here, if you look at the edges. And then let me I'll just go ahead and drag that up out of sight. And actually, I'll drag that up to 2.25 again. And you know what? Let me actually grow this selection, and we'll bring this down so it does something more visible, or maybe just out of sight here. And actually, I think it might be too close to that edge of that thing, so I'll just move that in like this, and then I'll grab this face. I'll grab this face back here, and we'll just go this way with it. Do this by 2.25 again, and then I'll do another extrude. I'll do another extrude, and just sort of, I'm just going to sort of take this piece and just angle it in towards this engine. So let me do this, match this kind of angle, and we'll just sort of create this gradual kind of thing. And I will actually split this edge here, and we'll move it out so it makes a bit more of a rounded shape. And now I can go and actually just barely intersect this face if I can. Let's do like that, and then I can delete that. So if I smooth this, you can see that we're not getting something that's very tube-like at all. So I do have to modify this topology a bit. I'm going to isolate this piece, and then I'll first just delete that edge, and I'll delete this edge as well. So what I'm going to want to do is actually use the multi-cut tool. I'm going to create what will essentially be the edge flow around here. So you can see I'm just going corner to corner. And that one's fine back there. So I'm now going to just drop in edge loops like this, and then I'll just delete these edges here. And now you can see that I've created kind of an edge flow, and I've created this edge flow that makes essentially a tube. So I kind of want this to be a little more visible here. So let's move this down, maybe to like there. And I'll also add an edge loop here and here just to support that. And we'll make an edge loop here that will kind of become the sort of cap piece. So obviously this is very square right now. So I'm going to actually smooth this piece, and let me do something like this. That's fine. We can just make, let me just extrude this out to make it look like this piece is actually intentionally going into that sort of engine cowling back there. And you'll notice that I'm getting a lot of edges here. I could probably delete every other edge on this curved part. And it'll be fine. And the other thing is these sort of elbow pieces, it kind of distorts the curvature here, so I always delete this edge. And that kind of helps with the curvature. So I'm going to then move these edge loops up. I think what I'll do is I'll delete this edge here, and we can sort of move this one down and this one up a bit, and then we could actually delete this one and delete probably these two as well, because if it's a straight piece we don't really need any edge loops. So now if I smooth that, you can see we're getting a nice kind of tube shape. So I'll assign my greeble mat to this. And now I can duplicate this, since we've mirrored this piece, And now if I scale this negative in Y, I've got kind of these two mirrored pieces that sort of hook onto the engine there. So one of the old standbys of creating pipes is of course using a polytorus. So let me create one real quick, and I think I want to make these pipes that connect the radiator to the body. So let me drag this over here and scale this up. And let's increase the radius a bit. Set the axis to 16, and then I'll set the height to 6. So now I think I'll scale that up even more. Now, actually I'll scale it back down. I think it can align with that kind of edge of that plate piece that's back there. So now I can just grab these faces and extrude and just drag them over. And go to the side view and do the same thing. Grab these faces, extrude, and pull them back. Now if I isolate this piece, I can pretty much just grab the faces I want and shift select the rest and delete. And let's add these kind of connection points to these pipes. So I'll just grab the ring of faces and extrude. And let me just kind of recenter that a little better. Let's drop in a couple edge loops there. Let's let's do the same thing up here. Maybe make it a little wider. And then drop an edge loop in the center. So now let me actually delete these faces that we created with the extrude first and assign my greeble mat. And now we got a pipe that kind of connects to the radiator. So I want to create a couple more that kind of connect to this greeble piece. But I think what I'll do is actually align these features just so they're kind of the same size. Let me make sure I do this actually properly. And now I can just drag these verts out here to this point, maybe to there, move it up a bit, move this, duplicate that one and move it down. So now let me move these two back and kind of line it up with the radiator piece. I'll grab the verts on the front of this one. And let's actually look at the wireframe and line it up with them. So that's looking pretty good. Now I can grab both of these and move these verts back till they intersect back here. And since we didn't really support the edges of this curve, I'm just going to drop in a few edge loops. And I'm kind of just eyeballing it, but I'm trying to make them about the same width as the actual faces on that curve. And let's actually make a little collar for this top pipe, just so it's a little different. Cool, so now we got these three pipes that kind of better integrate our radiator with the rest of our greebles. And I think I want to add some pipes to this cylinder area because it's looking kind of boring. And we've got these little conduits up here that we can kind of connect pipes into. So I'm going to use my cube method. So I'll scale this 2.25. And then I can extrude and then extrude by 2.25, and that'll kind of create my junction points where we can change direction. So I'll pull this face forward, and again 2.25, and now I'll pull it in this way and just go ahead and delete the end. And I think I'm going to pull this forward, but I want to pull all these verts on the side of the pipe in so they're not crashing through the fender. And then I think I'll also pull this part up, and we'll intersect it kind of with this top area on the pipe. And grab that edge and crash it through. And now we can then duplicate this and maybe have a pipe underneath it. And let me turn off my space fit layer. I can kind of align these and then Actually, you can see here, and I can move this over so it lines up with that other pipe conduit piece. And actually, before I did that, I should have actually done this step where I connect all these, or I create the edge flow. So let me just use the multi-cut and connect these corners. And now let me drop in some edge loops here to support that that curve that's going to be there. And I'm really eyeballing this as well, but I'm trying to make this edge ring kind of half the distance of the 2.25 we've done. And I like to maintain those square edges because it helps the supporting edge loops to remain flat. So now I'm going to run my smooth. Oops. So I want to delete this face before I run my smooth. And now I can delete some of the edges that I don't need, mainly the ones in the middle of everything, and then those weird ones on the elbow. And now I can move some of these other edge loops to kind of just support the curvature. So move those into place, assign my greeble mat, and now I can smooth. Now we're getting something kind of cool there. So let me build the kind of junction point where this is going to intersect with the that greeble piece. I'll straighten this edge out and maybe move it a little bit, and then I'll oops, wrong axis. I'll drag these faces out and delete the faces on the end, and then just drop in some edge loops here. So Maya sometimes does this thing where it won't display the edge loops I've done. I don't know why it does that, but it's been doing it lately. Not sure. But anyway, now that I've got that piece kind of modeled in, I can isolate these two and just duplicate this piece down, and then pull these verts back, and I can even match the height of these ones, and then just delete that part I made with cubes. It's kind of easier to take one pipe to the finish line rather than making two from scratch. Actually, I think I'll pull these verts down so they kind of intersect on either side of the curve of that piece. And then you can kind of see them a little better too. But I'll add a little collar piece to this pipe on the bottom just to give it a little more visual interest as well. I'll just do 0.25. So this time I'll use my cut polygons tool. Just drop those edge loops in, and then we'll edge ring and split over here. And now I've got these pipe pieces, and I can even smooth that greeble piece. It's looking pretty cool. So now I think I want to add these wires up here that connect these two pieces. So I'll start by getting my curve tool out, and of course I'm going to want to make sure that NURBS curves are visible before I do any work with curves. Let me just unhide everything so I can see, and then I'll just kind of draw this shape out, and I'll overshoot it. I'll overshoot the connection point just so I have enough control vertices to play with. I'll grab these three and rotate them. And now you grab all of these control vertices and just sort of move them into place. I'll scale these so they're straight, and these ones as well. Or these ones I'll just point snap. And let me sort of move these control vertices around so we get kind of a more natural curve to these wires. Cool. And now I can go ahead and create my cylinder. I'll make it 6-sided. and then I can just curve snap it over here, and then of course I'll move the pivot to this the center of this top cap, and then curve snap it to the bottom again. And now I can actually I'll scale it to 0.5, and now I can select these faces on the cap. I found that you actually want to right click and go to face mode rather than hitting F8, because when you hit F8 it basically changes your scene to component mode, and it won't allow you to select the curve. So I always grab the cylinder and right click and go to face mode, and then select the curve and then extrude. So I'm going to duplicate this curve and kind of reposition it over here. So let me get close enough, and then I'll just reshape this curve since it's traveling a shorter distance, and I think I'll make it kind of go outside of the first curve, and then on the inside of it, so it kind of wraps around. That's pretty cool. And now I'll go ahead and create another cylinder with 6 sides and scale of 0.5, and I'll curve snap it over here. And then I'll change the pivot, but this time I'm going to be smart and actually duplicate this. So I'll go to face mode, extrude along the curve, and add my divisions. And now let me duplicate this curve a third time, and we'll move it out. We'll move it out to this third cylindrical part. And now I can kind of reshape this curve as well. So I think I'll do the same thing where it goes on the outside and then it goes on the inside. Kind of like that twisty kind of look. So let me grab this one and sort of move it into place. And now I can use my duplicated cylinder, go to face mode, and extrude along this curve. And then I'll add the same amount of divisions. So that's looking pretty cool. Let me delete history, and then I'll go ahead and delete the faces on the ends here, and same over here. And actually I can move these ones back quite a bit, and I'll delete those faces. So now you can see what I'm getting if I smooth. But I'll go ahead and delete the curves, and then I'll grab these 3, and I'll move these faces up and extrude out so we get a little point of intersection there. And now I can actually go to a side view and delete those bottom faces. And actually I could just use the cut polygon tool to add my edge loops in there. Well, so that's kind of a nice little detailed piece. Adds a little bit of human scale to the back of that engine bay. So the next thing I think I'm going to tackle are these engines, which are going to need a lot of little pipes and tubes. Since we looked at that jet engine reference, the jet engines are covered with fuel lines and hoses and wires. So, but I'll spare you guys that and actually do that off camera. But there's actually a lot more opportunities on here to add wires, so you might notice quite a few more on the model next week. But that's about it for now. So here we are at the end of week 8. As I mentioned in the video, I've gone ahead and added some more pipes, kind of finishing up this engine using the techniques I went over in the lecture. These pipes here are actually mostly modifications of the pipes I created for the lecture, and these were just created with curves and extrusion. So this week is pretty much the last week of modeling. Next week we'll focus more on UV layout, UV packing, and final scene organization. We might add a few finishing touches next week, but at the end of this week your model should be more or less complete. So I hope you have fun modeling cables, tubes, and hoses, and don't forget to include your tank tread exercise with your submission. Have a good week, everyone.